All right, we're getting things set off, and I'm trying to feel the energy here, folks. I caught some kind of bug. I got a stuffly nose, I got a sniffly head, and I've got a scuffly body. To be honest, I'm not doing so hot, but it is a frenzied first quarter, and there is actually quite a bit to talk about. I could not, in good conscience, not do the HBAR News and Rumours show this week. There's just too much to talk about. And to be honest, if I didn't do it, the next episode would probably be 3, maybe 4 hours long. So, had to do it, have to do it. I've seen a lot of people too, in the ecosystem, even some of the folks from Swirlds, the HBAR Foundation, a lot of these conferences they go to, all these different types of things. People have been getting colds, people have been getting COVID, all these different things, and still powering through it, you know. I've been working at my home office for, like almost a decade now. So I don't have a ton of group activities. And I don't know if I have the strongest immune system, to be quite frank. I've got allergies. I think I got like an iron deficiency or something. So when I get sick, I get sick. So what I'll say is this, is if you're in any rush at all, don't bother with listening to this live. Listen to this on Apple Podcasts later or YouTube or something later, because you can listen to it at 1.5 times speed, 2 times speed, right? That's a pro tip for everybody out there. But we are live on Twitter Spaces with another week in Hashgraph to unpack. Let's take a quick look at what we're going to be talking about today. No guests today, as I said. Too much to talk about. And I don't have a ton of time this week. I don't have time for a 2-hour show, which I do think a few people will be overjoyed about. So if you're in for if you're a fan of snappy news and rumors show, you're in the right place. We're going to be talking about Hedera and the government, the U.S. government. Some interesting things happening there, and some interesting insights too shared by Rob Allen on the HBAR on the HBAR Bull show. Let me see here. We're going to be talking about, I'm seeing a DM here that Twitter Spaces is rugging. Don't worry. I am getting DMs that there might be an issue with Twitter Spaces. If you are having an issue, no cause for alarm, no cause for concern. One of the things I do at the show is I record separately. So that way nothing gets missed. So if for some reason Twitter Spaces is doing something wonky, if you're ever listening to the show, I mean, there's not a whole lot I can do about it, but that's one great thing about having this recorded on other podcast platforms. So if you ever are having a problem, honestly, best way to fix is just restart Twitter. But rest assured, the stuff's recorded, so you can always go back and listen to it later. Something else we're going to talk about is FSCO, Fresh Supply Company. Really interesting use case. I had the CEO on the show a couple episodes ago. Lots to talk about with FSCO. Brett Mcdowell wrote an article in the World Economic Forum website. Hedera's been continuing with some spicy tweets, which I like. AtmaIO has integrated GPT. There's a new website that's actually kind of cool. It tracks the top HBAR wallets by balance, which is kind of, I don't know, it's kind of interesting. Let me see what else is going on here. Some music industry stuff to talk about that's actually pretty fresh that I'm excited about. It's not just like minting music or stuff like that. It's really interesting. We're going to talk about ReRec from Swirlds Labs. Hashpack has some updates. Let me see here. We got a new node, right? That's exciting. We're going to talk about a couple new use cases. Quite a bit to unpack. I mean, a couple of these news items this week are pretty dense, and I took quite a few notes, so we'll definitely need some time to to dive into it. And yeah, if you need to catch up on previous week's news, head over to itsbrandond.com/HBAR, where you'll find past episodes. And I mean, when we talk about this first quarter, it's April 2nd, right? And that means we're 2 days into the second quarter. And January, February, and March was a pretty wild quarter for the Hedera ecosystem in a few ways. I mean, first of all, the Hedera ecosystem is kind of a microcosm within crypto, which is kind of a microcosm within the S&P 500. And with that in consideration, I mean, we saw the crazy things happening last year with Three Arrows Capital and FTX and all that kind of stuff. So many different crazy things happening. And this year, this first quarter, that was still continuing, also in the kind of traditional finance market with bank failures and all these different kinds of things, all sorts of different revelations, an onslaught of new information. And then within side of that little Hedera microcosm, there was a whole additional, frenzy of activity. And most notably, in January, we had this, quote, step function, right? Where we saw transactions jump from single digit to triple digit. And that's huge. That's something that the community has been waiting on for so long. And I mean, I reflected on this in, a couple episodes, maybe a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago. It was so hard being a Hashgraph enthusiast where the mainnet was operating at single digit transactions. That was really tough because that's the whole selling point of Hedera, right? And it was really difficult to rely on hypotheticals when it came to expressing your enthusiasm with this technology. It was actually really tough. And it was, I think, a big psychological burden for this ecosystem. And I think that with that step function unfolding, it set a whole new different chain of events in motion based off of a different mindset, right? We went from a mindset of this thing that I'm excited about isn't currently doing what it can. And now it is, right? We have the main net running at, 3, sometimes 4 digit TPS, which is incredible. On that front, it's a different space psychologically. It's a different vibe, and it set off this kind of chain of frenzied activity. And some of that we'll touch on in the show, but that's just the general consensus is in a good way, also in a bad way. It's been a frenzy. There's been so much that has happened. There's been so much growth within the Hedera ecosystem, right? There's been so many new things coming online, so many exciting things happening. But again, also at the same time, HBAR is still at single digit price, right? We're under 10 cents. It's in comparison to previous price action over the last 1 to 2 years. We're definitely suffering on that front. But that always brings the conversation around to this kind of asymmetrical situation, right? That we often find ourselves thinking about within the Hedera ecosystem. And there's often similarities drawn between Amazon in the late 90s and Hedera right now. Whereas at Amazon entering the new millennium and the burst of the dot-com bubble, you had a company that was financially very strong and continuing to grow and fortify with a stock price that was plummeting. And it wasn't a reflection of the company. It was a reflection of macro factors in the economy and in the world and in the sector. And as we know, ultimately Amazon proved to be very, very successful. And a lot of comparisons are drawn even by Lehman and Mance themselves between Hedera and Amazon. And it's a really obvious one. It speaks to the confidence they have in the project. And it does feel like it makes sense. It does feel like value on the network is continuously going up and the price of the underlying asset continues to go down. And this if you want to call it an asymmetrical opportunity, continues to grow. So I think that that's a renewed source of excitement for a lot of people in the Hedera community. And I think that has created a little bit of a disconnect in a good way from the rest of the market. A lot of people that I see come to Hedera say kind of like, oh, it feels like this is its own little world, somewhat detached from the rest of the crypto industry, but kind of in a good way. It's kind of strange. I think that again, that's really about two things for me. One is just this frenzy of activity we saw in this first quarter. And also, again, to really bring this right back to basics, this is a hash graph. It's also a new disruptive technology. So I think this is an exciting time. It's also worth remembering that a lot of the goals that were set for the first quarter weren't met in regards to, the number of use cases going live, all of these different types of things. Those did fall short. But again, we need to have it in full context and look outside of the Hedera ecosystem and what things could be impacting certain elements within our ecosystem. So it's that dance. It's that balance. What's happening in the big picture versus what's happening in the small picture, because sometimes as you start to see a really big difference between the two and they're not aligned, that's where opportunities lie. It's a vibe. It's the hash graph enthusiast way. And with that, good evening from Ottawa, Canada, everyone. My name is Brandon Davenport, and I'm a developer, artist, and creative agency owner at Dirksen & Davenport Incorporated. And like all of you, I'm a Hashgraph enthusiast. It is Sunday, April 2nd, and there's a lot to talk about. Welcome to Hashgraph News and Rumours, episode 71, a frenzied first quarter. This is a weekly show that covers the top stories related to Hedera, HBAR, and everything in between. Broadcast live on Twitter Spaces every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, and made available on all major podcast platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts, every Monday. Get all the info you need about the show and listen to past episodes at itsbrandond.com/HBAR. If you're listening live, check out the Twitter thread pinned to the top of the Spaces to take a deeper dive into each story. Also, everybody listening, take a moment now to share the Spaces to let your friends know you're listening. The more the merrier, right? You can also click the little comment button at the bottom right of the Spaces to ask a question or share something interesting that listeners might like to know. And I'll talk about it. And the show continues to grow from hundreds of listeners to thousands. And that's because of people like you that take the time out of their day to listen. And this show is honestly by far one of my favorite things to do. I mean, here I am, like sick as a dog, and I'm at my desk. Excuse me, and I've got my chair set to the lowest settings, so I'm sat so low at my desk. My shoulders are almost at my desk, and I'm leaning forward, speaking into my phone right now. I'm propped up. If you're interested in being a supporter of the show, please consider making an HBAR donation. It helps me continually add value to the Hashgraph community and keeps the show ad-free. You can send a donation to enthusiast.hbar using your Hedera wallet, brought to you by listeners like you. So the first thing I want to talk about, I've already been rambling on about stuff, but the next thing that I want to talk about is the mainnet and network activity. So I'm using Metrica for this, and we've seen some interesting stuff, and I'll kind of speak to two things. So as I was saying earlier, we're all very excited of that, quote unquote step function, right? We're rocking and rolling. On the 28th of March, we saw transactions go from 700 per second to about 150. And that's continued for about 5 days now. And to me, it's not clear why. It has been a point of some concern for the community, kind of not really understanding why that could be or what could be happening. As people know, and if you don't, most of the transactions on the network are submitted by Avery Dennison with their AtmaIO use case, which we'll talk about soon. And I'd say probably 90, 95% of the transactions on the network are from that one use case. And the types of transactions they're submitting are to the Hedera consensus service. And I mean, a reminder, these are all real transactions that aren't just sending messages, they're actually transferring value. Each of these are paid transactions and they're real transactions. Now, to pay for these transactions up until now, and I'd assume continuing on for some time, these are subsidized by a grant from the HBAR Foundation. So on the 28th, seeing transactions drop from 700 to 150 and continuing, and we haven't seen them rise back up, it's definitely a topic within the community. If we go actually to the official Hedera website, Hedera.com, on their homepage, they show live stats in regards to how many transactions were made over the last 24 hours. And that was sitting usually at about 50 or 60 million transactions per day. And right now it says 12. So we have seen a substantial decrease in transactions on the network. Now, this brings us to some really interesting stuff. I've noticed a few people. I've noticed Justin Atwell from Swirlds speaking to this topic of kind of transactions being down a little bit, saying no cause for concern, right? Also, we saw the official Hedera Twitter account say, quote, it's getting good on Hedera when over 12 million real-world transactions in the past 24 hours is considered a slow day. Take comfort in knowing that in the future, 1 billion transactions will be considered a slow day. So I've been talking over these last week's episodes of my opinion that the confidence within Hedera, Swirlds, and other organizations within this kind of microcosm of the Hedera ecosystem, they're all coming across like something has changed, almost like they had been waiting to be allowed to present their ideas in a particular way and have been given the all clear. And we've since seen these kinds of spicy tweets from Hedera. We've seen memes. We've also seen other representatives from HBAR Foundation, from Swirlds, and from other governing council members speaking, I feel, more openly, more aggressively, more confidently about the network, about what's happening. It just, to me, feels like behind the scenes, some really important and powerful pieces have fallen into place. Because it is a big difference. That's part of this kind of vibe of this frenzied first quarter is over these last few weeks and months, I've seen a transformation in how Hedera and, again, Swirlds and the HBAR Foundation present the network and talk about the network. And tweets like that I just read feel very different from the Hedera that we had last year. The Hedera last year would not ever really talk about activity on the network, right? It wouldn't comment as an organization or speculate or comfort the community or reassure the community. That's very new. And even saying something like, again, quote, take comfort in knowing that in the future, 1 billion transactions will be considered a slow day. Hedera has always kind of been faulted for being almost too straight-laced, too buttoned up, too enterprise. And for an organization like that that's consistently shown an incredibly conservative approach to how they talk about the network, to say things like this, I think really speaks volumes. And so that's just kind of what I'm inferring, bringing up those two specific things. And just before we move forward into our next story, again, I want to kind of take this situation and kind of fold it into the broader situation, right? At the beginning of the show, we were talking about how there's this distance, this asymmetric quality to the state of things, right? Value on the network going up, price of HBAR going down. Of course, there's macro factors involved, all those different types of things, but there is that asymmetric quality, right? And in this particular situation, which you could argue is very important to the health of the network, we have TPS down substantially, but we have Hedera really taking a whole new approach to this and being much more aggressive with their messaging. On the topic of a metric being down. So it does feel like this situation, this asymmetric circumstance is starting to creep more into the kind of the psyche and the zeitgeist of this community. And it feels like a pressure. It feels like things are, the ante is being upped. So it's very exciting. It feels very frenzied. You could very well say that this was a frenzied first quarter, and it could be an even frenzier second quarter. But that's just looking at the mainnet activity, all these different things, small picture, big picture, micro, macro, all those different types of things. It just, the common thread is something asymmetric in nature. Something's not adding up, but there's opportunity in that. Avery Dennison, AtmaIO, some exciting news that has nothing to do with Hedera, but that is worth highlighting. Last week on the Hashgraph Enthusiast News and Rumours, I had Patches from Turtle Moon Command Center on to talk about artificial intelligence, GPT, and the intersection of Hashgraph and AI. On that topic, just to quickly re-highlight something that I really didn't get a chance to touch on last week was AtmaIO integrating GPT. And again, this doesn't really have a ton to do with Hedera, but it does sit at that intersection a little bit, right? And some notes from this, let me just load up my notes here. So they've announced kind of a slew of updates to their product cloud. And a key insight from this update is the platform now manages over 28 billion items for brands across various sectors. And the spring 2023 update incorporates new AI updates, including the integration of ChatGPT for automating alert response. So this would be about providing automated updates and alerts that are much more contextual in plain English, which is really interesting. The generative AI will enable better... oh my God. I need to have a sip of my coffee. I'm doing the best I can here, folks. Wonderful. I got honey in this coffee. Local honey. The generative AI will enable better collaboration and more efficient communication among partners within the supply chain while ensuring privacy and data protection compliance. And just the last thing here is the AtmaIO team is working on additional capabilities such as natural language queries, content creation, and intelligent personalized notifications. So all that clumped together, it kind of speaks to two things here. A, it speaks to how innovative these governing council members are. It's good to see governing council members starting to leverage AI. And it does show that we have innovative companies on the council, but also it's exciting to see how Avery Dennison could find ways in which Hashgraph and AI could be leveraged together on a larger scale. And if there will be any crossover in that respect, it isn't clear, and I'm assuming there is no crossover between the ChatGPT integration in their product cloud and Hashgraph or the Hedera network. But I'm going to be watching this because like we were talking about last week, there are definitely things to be discovered and ways in which Hedera can kind of help with some of the shortcomings of AI. And AtmaIO could be one of those first use cases to cross that intersection, which would, on a larger scale, which could be interesting. And a good example was that glass to glass white paper that we were looking at last week in regards to broadcast companies tokenizing every frame from a video broadcast on a hash graph to ensure that the viewer is watching something unmodified or something like that. So when we look at supply chains and all sorts of different things, all sorts of ideas can pop into your head. So watch AtmaIO. New website too that launched. This is just kind of fun. I wanted to bring it up. Hedera-leaderboard.com. It basically ranks the top 500 wallets in regards to balance of HBAR. It's pretty cool. I mean, every network has one of these. I'm certain that we had one of these in the past. There was an old Network Explorer, hash, right? Hash.hash.info or something. Is that thing still kicking around? I don't know if it is. If it is, it's a good sign, but I don't know. We'll wait for it to load. But yeah, top 500 accounts. You can go see if you're a top 500 account. I mean, the number 500 has 3.5 million HBAR in it. So if you got over 3.5 million, you might have a chance to be on the rankings. Number one account has 2 billion HBAR. That's probably Swirlds or one of the governing council members or something. So cheers to that. Also fun update. Hedera got a gold Twitter check mark and a square profile picture. Apparently that costs something like $1,000 or like 20 grand a month or something. I read. I don't know. It's an appearances thing. I mean, Christian Hashgraph from Swirlds seems pretty excited about it. And it had to happen. I mean, regardless of what you think about Twitter, and that program, I mean, there's a big battle right now, just bringing this back into the AI conversation just real quick. If folks are familiar, you know, you can get the professional version of ChatGPT for $20 a month. It's not like that pays for your usage. It's probably much, much more than that to run the system. The only reason they're doing that is to ensure that they only have humans utilizing the web interface, right? Or the API. And Twitter is much the same. Twitter's dealing with AI issues. And so I think that that's why they're diving even deeper, you know, of course, to drive the bottom line, but it's really, you know, the only way to combat that. I really feel that, unfortunately, the main, let me see here if I can word this right. When we look at the line between AI, overcrowding the spaces in which humans spend time and share information, that line is the processes a bank uses to issue you a credit card. That's what this is right now. The line right now is to see who has been through that process via a bank by asking them to pay a nominal amount as a credit card transaction. That's what this is about, right? And I think that, you know, I believe Instagram is going to this model. A couple other websites are going to this model. And I really think that's the only mechanism that we have right now, that most of the world's population would have access to. And a square profile picture and a gold check mark, it does say a lot to people on the platform, right? It speaks to the authenticity, and it's important at a time when scams are really prevalent in the Hedera ecosystem, and there can be general mistrust. So good to see. Shout out. It's a win. I don't know. The music space, I really do feel that the music industry keeps dipping their toes into Hashgraph as a technology and learning more that the scope of distributed ledgers goes beyond blockchain. In my experience, speaking to independent artists and companies that I work with, it's really difficult to have a conversation if you use the words blockchain, crypto, or NFT. And Hashgraph is really exciting because a lot of times when I speak to people, I'll position the conversation and say, listen, I'll give you $100 if I use the words blockchain, crypto, or NFT. I'm not going to use those words because I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a completely different technology. And I think that as the music industry starts to learn more and more about inefficiencies that they see and some of the ways that these new technologies can fit it, we're starting to see interesting things like this. So Alex Russman from the HBAR Foundation, the head of the Metaverse Fund, tweets out about Studio 100 embracing Web3 customer engagement. They're utilizing Venly Wallet. And basically what this is it's a very large venue that's using Venly to interact with customers and submit payments and all these different types of things. And it's exciting because when you think about a band or an artist that has albums and maybe you've purchased their digital album, or how about this? I'm an artist and I say, if you've listened to more than 50 hours worth of my music and you get 10% off of my concert tickets or something like that. These new technologies are going to allow these opportunities to happen for artists and the industry. And so seeing things like this is very exciting to me because it's not just another digital collectible. It's not just another coin, right? This is a core piece of infrastructure for music, a giant venue, leveraging a new technology. And we're also seeing, the evil villain Ticketmaster is also looking at these kinds of new technology. So Hashgraph is the best aligned technology, and they're dipping their toes and they're seeing something they like. So I dig that. I like it. Something else we're going to talk about that's a big one is Hedera and the State Department, the U.S. government. It does feel like something that was pretty obvious, but there's some very interesting tidbits and key insights in this that I'll break down with you. I made a bunch of notes. So here's what it boils down to is when Hedera first became kind of a public network, one of the reasons they wanted to become a public network was a conviction in the fact that looking outwards, 10, 50, 100 years, most likely the best case scenario, if we have things like CBDCs and an intertwining of DLTs and government, it would be best leveraged on a public network, right? So watching years of Lehman and Mance and other core members of that initial team talk about the network, all these different things, you always got the feeling that they were playing a little bit of a different game, a little bit of a bigger game. And then, of course, last year and this year, we saw a lot of different run-ins with the government versus certain crypto entities and the SEC. And now we have this video of Elizabeth Warren posted today and stuff. So there's definitely some tension building. And there's an initiative from the U.S. Department of State that's the private sector commitments to advance democracy that kind of like aligns with the presidential plan for this kinds of things. And despite what you think about the current administration or different things, that's a whole other conversation. I think that this is something that if we look at it as a potential validating factor of the network, it's really, really interesting. So I'll bring up a couple. I'm just going to go into these notes. We're going to dive into it. There's a lot to talk about. Hedera is the only Web3 company among 150 participants included in this initiative. So that's the first thing to keep in mind as we take a look at this. Also, too, it's explicitly stated in this release that the U.S. government does not endorse the companies included in this and their various initiatives, but it is clear from what I've heard that there is some level of vetting that has likely occurred, right? So these entities that are a part of this initiative through the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. government have been through some vetting process. And Hedera has clearly demonstrated a commitment to positive social impact and following through on commitments they've expressed that align with these types of initiatives at a huge scale. This is an initiative that is coming from the highest office in the economy. right? I mean, I know it's the government, but this steers a lot of stuff. You've got major players in here. These 150 companies are juggernauts, and they're all aligning under this. And Hedera is the only Web3 company listed here, and that's worth highlighting. So there's 4 areas to this initiative, and those are advancing technology for democracy, fighting corruption, protecting civic space and human rights defenders, and advancing labor rights. Hedera is a part of one of these initiatives, which is the protecting civic space and human rights defenders. So basically, this initiative positions Hedera as a credible player in the technology sector. It's not just another crypto company. And it's important to understand this. Yes, Hedera might be the only Web3 company as a part of these 150 companies, as a part of this initiative. What Hedera also is one of the many top tier technology companies as a part of this initiative. And so I think that recontextualization is important and potentially furthers Hedera into that, again, that higher level as not just another crypto company, but a leading technology company alongside all the other ones, which is very interesting. Also, too, it does help counterbalance negative perceptions of crypto and encourages regulators to consider the benefits of blockchain technology and digital assets. So what I mean by that is having a company like Hedera as a part of these key conversations and with this kind of visibility and direct involvement with high levels of US government, we see Hedera stepping into a position of being an advocate and an educator in these types of technologies for the US government. And also, too, we've seen this almost at a higher rate for other governments around the world. But now when we look at the US, it's taken time, but Hedera has a seat at a very important table. And there's a couple other points here. So they're featured in the Protecting Civil Space and Human Rights Defenders. So Hedera will be convening a democracy roundtable on blockchain technologies. They're going to talk about supporting human rights, transparency, and sustainability, right? Speaking to those core things, but also making sure they get in that sustainability angle, because I think that that's really going to I think that's one of the key things that sets them apart from other Web3 companies. They're going to talk about different applications, including government accountability, fighting misinformation, right? That could very well be some of those types of use cases, like we talked about, glass to glass, tokenizing video frames, right? To prevent counterfeit video frames going into your eyeballs, reducing data manipulation, and tracking financial flows. When they say tracking financial flows, I just go, what about an old overhaul of the IRS there? Hedera will invite companies, trade associations, advocacy groups, academics, and government officials, and they'll publicly share a summary of the discussion and recommendations for next steps. That's a key thing here. Who is going to be providing recommendations for next steps within an initiative outlined by the U.S. Department of State? Hedera will be. Very cool. Now, obviously, this has brought up discussion in the community, and there's two, I think, main discussions happening around this news in the community. First is regulatory implications. So, and I'll just read kind of my notes here. Hedera's involvement in the Democracy Roundtable may positively impact its regulatory standing, right? So, when we look at the other side of this, which is all the confusion and frenzy around regulation, what is a security, what's a commodity, there's no way that this has a negative impact for Hedera. This is definitely a good look. And again, they're the only Web3 company included in this initiative. Also, people are discussing the SEC's perceived protection of no, that doesn't even matter. some of my things move so fast. Some of my notes are even outdated. I wrote these like, when did I write these? Thursday or Friday, or when this news came out. When did it come out? Yeah, maybe Thursday. So they're already out of date. That's how fast things move in this space. The community also acknowledges challenges regarding properly regulated environment for the crypto industry. So speaking again to those regulations, I think that something interesting about the Hedera community is I do feel like if we were to go to that list of top 500 HBAR holders versus the top 500 holders of currency of an underlying asset on another network, I do feel that Hashgraph enthusiasts, investors are generally really well educated on these kinds of things. And so a lot of the conversations I'm seeing around this in particular is pretty nuanced. It's pretty tempered. It's very productive. In, I think, stark contrast to some other communities. And so I think that, again, that's a little bit of social proof as to why Hedera was the only Web3 company included in this. I think the community is a really good kind of like temperature check on what the culture of Hedera is. The other thing the community is talking about is the significance that this has on the future of Hedera. Of course, this brings really big visibility and credibility due to the mention in this release. So maybe this isn't going to get the attention of the masses, but having that really fascinating tidbit of being the only Web3 company included in this initiative is very juicy. And I do think that, again, as we see renewed and heightened debate within the U.S. government, a lot of, some senators and officials being very opposed to crypto, some being more pro-crypto, this is really fresh ammunition for the argument of DLT technologies and crypto really being worth it. And having Hedera at the center of that is really powerful. And of course, this is going to attract investors. Now, this is the other thing is the impact on the technology that this is going to have on various industries, such as voting systems, could lead to further adoption. So it's always been floated out there, right? We've always talked about DLTs in general, but I think with the security of the Hedera network, many times I've heard people go, wow, this would be a really great technology to leverage for voting in the US or different things like that, or different government operations and things like that. And I think that as Hedera gains more visibility, the chances of those things, although very small, right, do increase a little bit. So that's also very interesting. That's some of the conversation in the community on this. But I mean, the key takeaway here is it shows how insightful the vision from Manson Lehman is. I think that if you were to go back to 2017 and watch Mance's speech at Harvard, lecture at Harvard, or go back to 2018 and watch the launch of the public network, and at that time say, did you know that 5 or 6 years later, Hedera is going to be the only Web3 company included in an initiative with the U.S. Department of State? You really would have thought a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh time about what this technology is going to do and how disruptive it's going to be. So reading this news now, who knows what's going to happen? I think that step functions can come in all forms. Another top story this week is FSCO. We've talked about Fresh Supply Company for quite a while on the spaces, and we eventually had David CEO, on the show as a guest. We spoke about what they're building, and we talked about what their tech stack does, the value that it brings to the supply chain space, and what does this mean for the MasterCard Hedera connection. So a few key points about the FSCO stuff. There's two key parts to this use case: capturing information and then data-driven payment triggering. So this is the FSCO, the food supply chain ontology, is tokenizing assets and events throughout the agri-food supply chain to enable complete transparency and deep verifiable data for financiers. So they're doing things like proof of existence, proof of work, proof of supply, proof of quality, proof of specification. And the data is used to activate conditional event-based payment triggering. So what the hell does that mean? So when we look at these supply chains in the agri-food space, you're looking at food products, milk, meat, all these different types of things. Where did they come from? How are they sourced? How do they get changed? How do they ultimately get delivered? And what types of loans and payments and assessments and analysis have to happen in this space? And this is very, very similar to, if you can wrap your head around the AtmaIO use case, right? The key thing with AtmaIO was, the carbon markets are very opaque, not transparent at all. And, this is kind of the same, is it's maybe not strictly about carbon markets. It's also about facilitating payments and these different types of things. So when we look at the space, there's loans that have to get made from one supplier to another, from one financier. They have to make sure that, that these products actually exist, that the quality is correct, that the supply is accurate, that the work is being done. And this is the FSCO is a tech stack that does some really interesting things. I'd say, I don't know if it leverages the Guardian. It's very similar to the Guardian in the respect of it's an entire tech stack that can be used for different use cases and subsets of use cases. And what's really fascinating here is the MasterCard connection. So let me read through here. So, of course, the agri-food value chain has traditionally been complex and opaque, limiting financiers to balance sheets and profit and loss statements during risk assessment. It's really slow and inefficient. By digitizing food production and trade, FSCO allows financiers to analyze and validate goods and assets flowing into and out of a business, enabling the team to substantiate cash flows on a continuous basis. So that's what this does. It starts to have things flow more. There's less stops and starts for analysis and everything like that. And they're migrating their service. So this is something that's been running for a while, and they're migrating to Hedera. They're going to be utilizing the consensus service and the token service. But what's interesting, and that I talked about with David, is they migrated from the MasterCard provenance blockchain. So that's what makes this use case particularly interesting, is MasterCard had a private blockchain that companies would utilize for things like this. MasterCard sunset that product. So FSCO went, okay, we need to unplug our tech stack from this blockchain, MasterCard provenance, and plug it in somewhere else. After much research, they plugged it into Hedera, but what they bring along with it is the tooling on the other side to feed MasterCard payments into that blockchain that it's connected to. So that's what makes this really interesting, is a lot of these payments being made in this use case are made using MasterCard, and those activities will be written to the mainnet. So that's exciting. And it's often been talked about in Hedera that what if one of these major MasterCard companies like Visa or MasterCard became a governing council member or developed a use case on Hedera? It's often brought up too that the governing council model was inspired by the structuring of Visa and one of the books that the founders of Visa wrote. So there are all these connections, but it was always just kind of inferring different things, and also kind of really what it came down to was, well, at some point, one of them is going to have to join the governing council. But when would we actually start to see some of that connective tissue form? And it's here now, right? MasterCard transactions will be done on FSCO's tech stack, and those will be written to Hedera. So now there's actually a technical connection between MasterCard and Hedera, which is really exciting. And, oh yes, I am correct. FSCO plans to integrate with the Hedera Guardian. So that makes things even more powerful. And you know, we talked last week about the Guardian. There's a lot of exciting things happening with the Guardian. Now, this is one thing that's really interesting to me, just going back on some comments that David made, the CEO of FSCO, that he made this week that I found very interesting. The first thing that he said in an interview, I believe, with the HBAR Bull, he said he can't share much, but there is a part 2 to the MasterCard story. What does that mean? We have seen governing council members and people within the Hedera circle mention all sorts of different numbers of governing council members, and there are common slip-ups, right? We have 28 governing council members now. We've heard people say 32 or all sorts. So, and we've also heard Shane from the HBAR Foundation say they have 30 companies in the pipeline for the governing council. There are many coming. There's, I think 1 or 2 that are ready to be announced. When they'll be announced, I don't know. But it really makes you think, what is the part 2 to this MasterCard story? It's very interesting. And it's made even more interesting because we have seen, excuse me, oh my God. I'm going to hold out as long as I can, folks. We're almost through it. We're almost through it. I just did like one of those, I don't even want to talk about it. I did a burp and it was very strange. Like, was it an inverted one? Don't quite know how I feel about it. But the other thing with MasterCard is we've seen them partner with other use cases on Hedera as well, not being connected in a technical fashion like we've seen with FSCO, but we have seen them as either a partner or a supporter of other use cases on Hedera. So the connections are growing. I'd say it's very similar to Microsoft, right? We've seen so many different connections between Microsoft and Hedera, going as far as a representative from Hedera speaking on a panel with a representative from Microsoft. And of course, Microsoft being partnered with Project New Dawn from EM Tech, a CBDC project, right? Microsoft was a partner for that. MasterCard does kind of the same thing. So there are these other connections as well that are very interesting. So it begs the question, is MasterCard joining the governing council? I don't know. I don't think we've been as rich in governing council rumors as we have now. I mean, if folks recall, Hedera, the official Hedera account, accidentally followed Sony, right? And we talked about that at length that week when it happened. But you really think about who could be joining the governing council. Another thing about FSCO, the second thing that David said that was really fascinating was when asked about what impact will this new use case going live have on the mainnet, David said they will be tokenizing, quote, enough items, and we, quote, won't be disappointed in network usage. So this speaks to something else about FSCO and David in particular. This is an enterprise use case. This is not something kind of like quote unquote crypto. But I do want to speak to the approach that FSCO is taking because I think it's really good. FSCO is doing something different than a lot of other enterprise use cases on Hedera. A lot of people have seen the CEO on Twitter engaging with the community. He started very suddenly in early March, February. And FSCO and David both come across as though they have something to prove to this community, right? And that feels very different from other enterprise use cases. You didn't have representatives from AtmaIO, commenting every few hours on conversations within Twitter that were happening regarding Hedera and their use case and different things. They're taking the approach that a Hedera project would take, arguably that an NFT project would take. And it's very powerful because I don't think that the users of their platform is us, but galvanizing the community behind your use case, I think early on is a really powerful thing. And I think that that's how they come across, and I don't think there's something wrong with it. The Hedera community is still pretty small in comparison to some other communities, and the ways in which FSCO communicates what they're doing comes across as though they have something to prove to this community. That's what I take from it, and I think it's great. I think a lot of other companies should take that approach because I think that this community can definitely be a strong wind in your sails. And like we saw with the Twitter post from the US State Department, all the comments in there are, Hedera related comments and hangry barboons and dead pixels and all these different types of things. It's this community aspect that's really exciting and I think makes people very curious. So props to FSCO. David, shout out. I think you're taking this the right way. It's a fresh approach to enterprise and embracing these kind of microcosms of what you're doing. FSCO is stepping in and they're going to be leveraging this new technology, Hashgraph from Hedera. There's a community behind that. Let me engage with it. Let me get them on my team. Let me have them advocate for what I'm doing and support what I'm doing. I think it's great. Shout out. Just something I noticed. I don't know if anyone else noticed it. It doesn't feel like an enterprise use case. For the better. Now let me see here. Another big item, our last big item of the day, is this article from Brett Mcdowell in the World Economic Forum blog. The article is called How We Create an International Framework for Privacy Preserving Digital ID. And Brett McDowell has this thing that he's identified as the panopticon problem, which is how can you have true privacy with a digital ID that's international, that is a product that you don't constantly have to re-authenticate. So for example, if I have a Canadian passport and I go to another country, there's effectively some form of audit that happens, right? Now, if I were to have some kind of international ID, the idea would be I get to another country, have some kind of zero knowledge proof interaction, and there is no audit needed. But because of different standards and different methodologies it kind of is difficult because even though you could have an international digital identity and you then get to another place or go to do something, there's always going to be the need to do that same re-auditing or verification. So what's the solution for that? And Brett McDowell kind of touches on this. So I'm going to go over some of my notes in this article, but there's 850 million people that lack official identification. So think about that. There's like what, 7-8 billion people in the world. You can say that over 10 to 15% of the world's population doesn't have ID. They don't have an identification of who they are. And that is kind of crazy. I mean, we all have some form of identification, and almost 1 billion people don't. And that basically means that they can't really participate in the world the same way most other people do, which does make the world a little less diverse. Now, decentralized digital ID enables more effective participation in the digital economy with privacy-preserving features. The World Economic Forum's Digital ID Initiative aims to establish an international framework for digital ID policies and standards. Now, one high-level note that Brett McDowell brings up time and time again is generally when they talk about digital ID, they're also talking about non-human things, right? So similar to products running through the Avery Dennison supply chain, right? All of those products have a digital ID. So it's not just a human that would travel to another country and have to have a digital ID. It could also be a product that has to travel to another country with a digital ID. And all the optimizations that can come from that, something not having to be audited and just boop, scan, right? That fluidity. So centralized digital ID systems face the panopticon problem, where providers have access to all user transactions and interactions. So that's what Brett McDowell is talking about is that's the problem to be solved, but you have to solve it in a fashion in which you also eliminate the need for constant authentication and re-auditing. Blockchain or Hashgraph powered decentralized digital IDs provide a better privacy and compliance, removing the need for an identity provider. That's important. Users store digital identity metadata on a blockchain or Hashgraph and personal information in digital wallets with verified credentials. State-of-the-art decentralized digital ID technology is rapidly evolving with innovations like, quote, soul-bound tokens, which are basically either an NFT or something that you'd hold in your wallet that would be programmatically frozen in your wallet by the network. So you can do that on Hedera now, where you can put NFTs in people's wallets and then freeze them so they can't remove them from their wallet. Effectively, a very rudimentary form of digital ID in some form or fashion. So this is also really interesting. There are tools like Envision's blockchain's Guardian, right? We talked about the Guardian before, that help migrate the risk of fraud in tokenized climate asset marketplaces. So again, talking about those use cases where digital IDs are leveraged that aren't about people, right? It's about products, it's about assets. Decentralized digital ID relies on open technology standards, open source blockchain infrastructure, and public registries. So that's the other key highlight, and kind of speaks a bit to the whole State Department stuff with the US government is, again, I think Hedera is really pushing for a lot of this to be built on a public network, which I think is critical. And we see it here in an article on the World Economic Forum website. And again, I don't think this is about what you think about the World Economic Forum. I think this is about Hedera having a seat at the table, and they appear to be advocating for things that align with the values of the community. And one of those key things is that these types of activities happen on a public network, right? The Forum's Digital ID Initiative engages stakeholders to create an international policy and standards framework. So this was the key insight here, and this key insight doesn't come from this article. I had to go back to an interview that Brett Mcdowell did on the Gossip About Gossip podcast with Zenobia from Swirlds. And he shared a key piece of information that really clarifies all of this. What Brett McDowell said is there needs to be a focus on policy level interoperability. So that's the missing piece to all this, right? We can change from the current system to an international digital ID, but that doesn't necessarily solve the problem where a country would interface with a digital ID either for a person or for a product and go, okay, we trust this trustless system. Most likely they'll want to do their own audit in some fashion or analysis. And that would be counterintuitive for the whole purpose of something like this. So what Brett McDowell is talking about is policy level interoperability. What that means is that there is new standards established, new international standards established for these different policies. So that way it's a different situation. If all of these different countries are using the same policy standards for an international digital ID for humans and for products, then it creates that parity. So that is a really important key insight from Brett McDowell that I appreciate is you can for sure have interoperability from a technical standpoint, but if you don't have it from a policy standpoint, it's not going to work. Also too, it ties into tokens representing ownership of property, intellectual property, or financial instruments. So that's the other side to this is once you have a tokenized digital identity for a product or a person, you can instantly do all sorts of different things with that, tie it to all sorts of different pieces of information, and be able to perform actions and checks on somebody without having access to the information. And that's the key here is right now, they have access to your information. If, for example, your bank goes, or if you go to your bank and you say, listen, I'd love a line of credit for $25,000. Your bank has to say, hey, do you have an income of over $100,000? And you have to somehow prove that, right? You have to go through some kind of auditing process. With this new system, it would basically be the bank saying, does this person have an income of greater than this amount? Yes or no? Yes? Okay, great. So that's what this is all about. And I think that sure, the technology part of it is one thing, but it's also the policy part. So that's one key insight from Brett McDowell that's important. And that's Brett's article. Read it. I mean, it's a lengthy one, but it's good. And watch the video. I mean, again, this stuff is not super like cool, but it's big. It's big stuff. Same with the US government and Hedera working group kind of thing. It's like, it's big stuff. So keep up to date on it. It's important to stay up to date on. Those are really our major stories. And I have a few more updates to wind up the episode here. There's an article on Coin United, which is a news website for something. I haven't heard of it. The reason that I bring up this article is because it's concerning a product from Swirlds Labs called ReRec. Folks unfamiliar, ReRec is a new technology being developed by Swirlds that enlists helpers, which are people or other entities that you're connected to that would share a secret, aka your private key. So that way, if for some reason you misplaced your private key, your helpers could be leveraged and their devices could be leveraged to regain access to your account. It also may lead to a situation where you won't need to have your private key to do things. And there's some specific things that this system does. And it's, ReRec, decentralized recovery. Also, that it could be used for decentralized custody. It's a new technology, leveraging old technologies, which is funny. I mean, it's a common theme with Dr. Lehman Baird, right? Hashgraph is arguably old technologies leveraging a new idea. Same with ReRec. There's a theme here. But the only reason I bring this up is this is an article writing about it from a website I don't recognize. So somehow news and information about DREC is making its way into the broader crypto space, which I think is great because this is a piece of software. This is a new resource being developed that isn't specific to Hedera. It could be used by any network. So I just wanted to highlight this. We don't need to dive into it anymore. But this is one of the first times I'm seeing DREC being talked about just kind of in a random publication, which is a signal to me that there's some eyeballs on this now. Hashpack is coming out swinging. They've published some numbers, and it's very cool. They have 250,000 users on Hashpack, or sorry, 250,000 accounts created on Hashpack. Most notably, most of those accounts hold HBAR. There's an average account balance of 16,000 HBAR, which is worth noting, right? I mean, when we look at different wallets, sometimes the amount of accounts reflected don't hold any HBAR, so you wonder how accurate those metrics are. But Hashpack does have over 4 billion HBAR inside of 250,000 accounts on their platform. So that's pretty crazy. And they do compare it against competitor B, right? Competitor C. I'm assuming that competitor B is Blade, B for Blade, and competitor C is, I don't know, maybe Walla Wallet. Couldn't be though. Walla Wallet must have more accounts than that. I don't know. But Hashpack is, I think that's an important metric to highlight. Yeah, you have a ton of accounts, but how many of them have HBAR in it? So 250,000 accounts. Shout out to Hashpack. Congrats. Keep it rocking and rolling. And they also published something regarding Wallet Connect. So in the ecosystem, generally, when there is a core piece of infrastructure either being added or taken away or modified, really the HIP process is designed for that. And I think that a lot of people get alarmed when something like that happens that didn't have a HIP. And for those that are familiar with the Hedera improvement proposal process, right? The HIP process it's a way in which regular people can help influence the network, and there can be HIPs that are really kind of core infrastructure that require voting from the governing council. Also, there's some HIPs that are pretty straightforward, maybe just a set of standards. An example of that would be HIP 412 for NFT metadata standards. I was one of the authors on that. But that process is great because it allows people like me to have input and influence the network, right? That's what this is all about. That's what this Web3 stuff is all about. And it can be disheartening when things are changed without a process like that happening. Because what it tells the community is we're not equal, right? And I think that can cause problems. The HIP process, by definition, kind of sends a signal to the community that, listen, whether you're sitting on the board of Hedera or whether you're doing a cool NFT project, we have equal opportunity to influence the network and make it the best that we can make it together. And in this post from Hashpack regarding Wallet Connect, and folks unfamiliar with Wallet Connect is a integrations platform that allows different wallets from different networks and all these different types of things interface with each other. You can think about it as interoperability for wallets, right? To do sorts of different things. So it's a good thing. But I'm just going to read a section here from Hashpack. So Hashpack says, what took so long for this new wallet standard to be put in place, because as we know, there's Hash Connect, right, which is Hashpack's SDK that allows different dApps to connect with Hashpack. Blade Wallet has their own. I don't know if Walla Wallet has their own, but it allows you to connect your wallet to an application. And really the goal of this is, could we have one that would kind of be interoperable with all sorts of different wallets on Hedera, but also interface with wallets on other networks and everything. Very cool, right? So what's taking so long? What took so long? So Hashpack says, quote, at the beginning of March, the library was made public. And the library, by the way, they're referring to kind of a code library, a bundle of code that would be utilized to bring this new standard to life, right? That other wallets in the ecosystem would use. The library was made public by another wallet provider that had elevated access to the repository, right? The repository being the bucket in which these different libraries of code are made accessible to the community. This was done without the knowledge of Swirlds and without any cooperation, knowledge, or input from other major ecosystem partners. The library remains public to the Hedera GitHub, but we currently consider it not ready for production use. Again, this is from Hashpack. We're involved in discussions with Swirlds, the HBAR Foundation, and other ecosystem participants around how to move this project forward. So obviously this is solving a problem for the community, but I know that the other wallet they're talking about is Blade Wallet. And I reached out to Blade Wallet asking for clarification. They've told me that ideally they'd move this to a HIP. And hopefully that's what the case is. Because when we have something like this, that's a core piece of infrastructure that can expand the ecosystem, that would have a lot of impact on the ecosystem, right? If something like this doesn't go through the HIP process, people in the community should be pissed off, because it says there's an inequality into who can contribute to the network, right? If someone is making contributions to the network or changes to the network or standards, I shouldn't say to the network. This in particular doesn't necessarily make changes to the network. This is more of a standard play that involves software. So I don't want to misrepresent this. This isn't something that dramatic. This is just a set of standards and tooling for the ecosystem to use. But for something like this, to not go through a HIP process is egregious. And it shouldn't be that way, right? If the HIP process is required for me and a bunch of ragtag NFT people to publish metadata standards, it should be required for this. So I do hope to see a HIP for this proposal. I want to see the community able to have a public conversation about it. And I hope that in the future, ecosystem participants aren't dumping stuff in the repo. God bless. But that's my opinion on this. And, you know, I've heard from many people in the ecosystem about it. I've talked to this wallet and that wallet. And that's my opinion. My opinion is this is something that should be a HIP. I don't see a HIP yet. Show me the HIP and I'll stop whining about it. In good news, Dell's online, folks. Dell is online. The node for Dell has been brought online in New Jersey, USA. Cool stuff. I mean, it's great. Fun fact is the specifications for nodes for the Hedera network reference Dell hardware, and they have forever. Now they got one of their own. Give yourselves a pat on the back, Dell. I'm trying not to laugh too. Whenever I laugh, I start hacking up a lung. This cold is getting me, folks. We're almost at the end here. We only got a couple more things. One thing I don't know a ton about. I just heard about it today. I took a couple quick notes. What I'm about to say on the Diamond standard, you may find more confusing than providing answers, but this is what I've gleaned from this. There's a new thing called the Diamond standard use case coming to Hedera. Diamond Standard recently launched a secondary market for instant trading of Diamond Standard coins. Spot market allows free trading. Each Diamond Standard coin contains a blockchain token stored on a wireless chip inside the coin with a fungible set of diamonds. My goodness. This sounds like something made by something from like a James Bond movie. Ownership of the regular license token equates to ownership of the commodity. It can take delivery at any time. It's built on Hedera. Diamond Standard's migration to Hedera, right? That's the key thing here, migration, is enhanced speed, security of its spot market. Diamond Standard's choice to build on Hedera seems to be driven by the business solution it offered. So that's what I've seen, and it kind of speaks to a few different things we're seeing. Like on a previous episode, I was speaking to Rob Allen about some of these different markets coming to Hedera. I see Rob listening. Hello, Rob. I hope you're doing well. You are probably already experiencing Monday because you're living in the future in Sydney. So tell me how Monday is. And we talk about Tollum Earth. We talk about the carbon offset market. And now we look at this, diamonds. We look at DLA Piper having tokenized over $500 million worth of assets on Hedera in 2021. What this brings me back to is something that Scott Thiel from DLA Piper said in a recent interview. Well, not recent. I think it was late last year. He said a better metric for the Hedera network wouldn't be TVL, right? Total value locked. It would be TVR, total value represented. And that still stays in the back of my mind because I think about, okay, wow, a diamond spot market, carbon offset trading, $500 million of, traditional assets tokenized on Hedera. And then what do we have for TVL in the DeFi space, right? Like, 50 million. Really gets you thinking how value on this network will be redefined because the numbers are going to start getting so big. It's going to be unignored. It's going to be, we're not going to be able to ignore it. And it will again be one of those things that sets Hedera apart from other networks. And that really brings us through the news, guys. Thank you for sticking it through. Reminder too, tomorrow Hedera has their community call on Discord. Remember when they used to do like the town halls, like those Zooms every month with Manson Lehman? Remember when Manson Lehman would hop on Zoom for an hour every month to talk about Hedera? So they're doing these calls in Discord now. I'll be speaking on that call for a little bit. I'll just be sharing some insights from various working groups and alliances within the ecosystem that I chair operations committees for. So I've got some cool things to share. No alpha, right? I'm not going to be spilling any beans. I'm just going to be sharing some cool insights. So there's that. And also too, next Sunday is Easter Sunday. I'm not doing a show next week, guys. I'm taking a day off. We got some family stuff happening, and family comes first, right? So no show next week. This will have to tide you over. But I do plan the following week. Something that I would love to do is just review some of the top news items from the past quarter, right? From this frenzied first quarter. So that might be something I'll do on the next episode. I also have a couple guests lined up that I'm speaking with that are very interesting. So I also have people reaching out to be guests. Just a quick note too. I have people reach out to be guests on the show and all these different types of things. I really appreciate people reaching out to be guests on the show, but to be quite honest, they're usually people that you hear on other shows, and I don't really know what new thing I would be offering other than just giving them another place to talk about, their new use case or, another stop on the book tour. I'm really trying to steer the show in a direction where I find something that is a very interesting little corner in the ecosystem full of tidbits, or somebody that could maybe give insights and answers to a conversation I'm seeing in the ecosystem. So I'm trying to find guests that are a little more off the beaten path, or people that I think could provide some really great insights. So we got some interesting people coming, and I want to try to get people on the show that we haven't heard on other shows before. So, because other shows are great. I mean, a quick shout out to Hello Future Buzz, the HBAR Bull. Those are two shows that I listen to, that I learned, that help me stay up to date on the ecosystem. So, this show is just a part of a balanced breakfast. So another week behind us and another week ahead. A huge shout out to everyone listening live on Twitter Spaces right now, and an extra shout out to everyone listening to the recording on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, wherever else you may find yourself. If you have a moment, give the show a rating and review on your favorite platform. It helps a lot. And really the key takeaway from this week is we had a frenzied first quarter. And as I was talking about at the top of the show, or I guess at the bottom of the show, at the beginning of the show, I got cold brain. It's this asymmetric thing that we have going on right now, right? Value on the network going up, price of HBAR going down, TPS, right? Down right now. The confidence and conviction and forcefulness of communications from Hedera and other entities is through the roof. There is a asymmetric nature to things right now. It feels like we started this quarter more balanced, and now we are way out of whack, but in the best way possible. And something that I could equate this to maybe is something a little bit like a slingshot. As that pebble gets further and further away from the sling, that just means that it may go that much further. So that's what I'm feeling right now. Now, that is to say, let's not pull it so hard that it snaps. Thank you for tuning into Hashgraph News and Rumors, episode 71 of Frenzied First Quarter, broadcast live on Twitter Spaces every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, and made available on all major podcast platforms every Monday. Get all the info you need about the show and listen to past episodes at itsbrandond.com/HBAR. Make sure to join the Hashgraph enthusiast Twitter community to share your insights, ask questions, and invite new friends. If you'd like to become a supporter of the show, also too, real quick, the Hashgraph enthusiast Twitter community just passed 800 members, which is amazing. We're on our way to 1,000, and lots of good combos happen in there. We'll have people that are starting a new project. They'll jump in there and say, hey, I'm looking for a developer, or I'm looking for somebody, or someone that's completely new to the Hedera ecosystem will kind of be like, I'm new to Hedera. What should I check out? I'll be posting in there. I like that the conversation's low noise, and it's a good spot. If you'd like to become a supporter of the show, feel free to send an HBAR donation to enthusiast.hbar using your Hedera wallet. I appreciate everyone tuning in, and I will see you live on Twitter Spaces, not next Sunday, right? The following Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. For everyone listening live now, I'm going to keep the spaces open for a few more moments. You know the drill. If you see somebody listening that you recognize and you haven't connected in a little bit, click their profile, send them a message, ask them what they're up to. I can almost guarantee you that they're doing something new. That's just the vibe of people in this space. Also, if you see someone that you don't know, you see a profile picture in here that you don't recognize, well, you've both been listening to me ramble on for an hour and a half, so you have something in common. Click their picture, send them a message. what's going on. You might discover your new partner for a project, or rediscover an old friend. So with that, thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. And hello, future. Goodbye, past.